Welcome to a special edition of the Open Water Wise Up podcast. My name is Chris Albrecht, and I am excited, a little nervous, but I feel like today's talk is going to be super inspiring for a lot of reasons. I'm speaking today with Karen Wickre. She is the author of the excellent book, Taking the Work Out of Networking. So first, I'm going to say hello, Karen, and welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much.
Okay, so before we get into networking, right? Because networking is really important. You wrote a whole book on it. The book is fantastic. I highly recommend people go out and get it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But honestly, I first came across you as the subject in one of Chip Conley's books, Wisdom at Work, where he had like a huge section, he had a huge section devoted to you, which is like high praise and pretty awesome. But to me, I feel like you have had a career that I sort of aspire to. And the reason I say that is because it showed me like, you can say like you've done a lot of different things, but you were sort of able to morph as times changed, and you've worked for a lot of interesting companies. Could you please just give us a little bit of background about how you got to this point right now and to the point to where you wanted to write the book?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, in a nutshell, I'm a liberal arts. I have 2 degrees in liberal arts. Okay, so I was in no way prepared for a business career or a technology career, and I literally stumbled into tech after I moved to San Francisco, which was 40 years ago. At that time, personal computing was on the rise. I believe me, I knew nothing about it. I was working in a nonprofit that had a K-Pro. Um, but that nonprofit, one of the board members was a guy named David Bennell, who had founded PC Magazine, PC World Magazine, and Macworld Magazine. I knew from nothing about any of that, but he was a kind of quirky guy, and he kind of took a shine to me. I mean, I got to know him as a board member, and kind of out of the blue one day, he said, "I'd like to hire you." And I was like, "Who, me? What are you talking about?" And I just stepped through that door. I took this job at a magazine publishing company, learned a ton about magazines, didn't understand till later how much I was also learning about personal computing as it was on the rise. This was in the mid 80s.
Was it Ziff Davis? Was that it? Or
This was IDG.
IDG?
This
Sorry.
was IDG, the competitor, right?
Yes.
Um, and I just found that the whole environment suited me so well. I would never have known about it even. It was just a completely foreign world. But at that time, there weren't a lot of experts. There were a lot of English majors who were, going into these computer magazines and there were many of them because everything needed explaining about how you do things. Things were more complicated. And the goal of the IDG publications was let's make it simple and plain language and so on. So it was like the beginning of consumer tech. And I just found I liked the people so much. They were just kind of suitably irreverent and flummoxed by all the jargon, just as I was. And it was not by today's standards, but at the time it was fast moving. And I just took to it. I just enjoyed everything about it. And that was really the start of, a career that has continued with tech in Silicon Valley for all these years. And I think what I learned pretty quickly was how fluid the industry was. It still is, but people did reinvent themselves and have to. If you staked your your money on CD-ROMs, that was fine for a couple of years, but then
Yeah.
it wasn't fine. You had to figure out something else. So because it was all so fluid, I just really enjoyed the sort of fast pace of the whole thing, which has only accelerated over the years. So I've worked for big companies. I've worked for agencies. I think my through line has always been writing and editing, and with a goal towards making things clearer and less jargony.
Yeah.
And over time, that's gone from technical jargon to sort of business jargon that I'm fighting against, but the same idea. So the the notion of a networking book came about sort of sideways, but but based on the idea that I have maintained a lot of contacts over the years, partly because every one of us in tech for a long time have moved around a lot. I'm sure you have also got a long list of jobs that you've had.
Too long.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think my skill in this area was keeping in touch with people as they moved around, as I moved around. And that led to, a conversation with a literary agent and a publishing editor and a couple of other people. And so it became sort of an exercise for me to say, how can I kind of break down what to me are kind of intuitive, you know, processes that I do every day to keep in touch with people and to reach out to new people. And by the way, people need to do this throughout their lives. That's what I think. And so I thought, how can I sort of document this in a way that people can give it a try on their own if it's not instinctive to them as it is to me. So that's how the book came about.
Well, I think you're also at the risk of you're downplaying a little bit because you were able to parlay the IDG thing into other, right?
Yes.
Like you've worked at a number of really high profile and great companies. I imagine through sort of the networking, this sort of like ongoing networking. So can you provide just for the audience, just to give them
Yeah.
more rounded? So it wasn't just at IDG, you then moved on
No,
to
no.
other great places.
Yeah, no, I did. I worked at a bunch of places, again, without a particular, it wasn't like I had a job slot that I could just fit into, like product manager, for example. So and a lot of places don't tend to hire just writers and editors. I wasn't an advertising writer or copywriter. I was more of a business writer, utility. And so that was a skill I always used, but I had a variety of jobs that tended to be in various marketing and comms teams. And my job that I got at Google starting in 2003, I had started contracting there the year before, thanks to my friend, Cindy McCaffrey, who was the first VP of comms at Google and who I had worked with at two other companies previously.
Yeah.
So, I'd kept in touch, she'd kept in touch, we'd moved around. And when it came to starting in at Google, it was a big downturn here in Silicon Valley in 2000, 2001. And I remember I did reach out to her to say, do you have any work? And initially she said, no, we just hired a writer. And then a little while later, she called back and said, actually, we could use you, but you have to get along with the whole team. It's not just my say so. And so, of course, I understood that. And I went down and immediately got pressed into service. Still took about a year to get hired because headcount, even in the early years of a company, matters for something. So I had to wait for some kind of headcount to open up.
Right. Okay. And you detail that in the book actually,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
look, I don't want to spoil anything, but you weren't above throwing some parties for people.
Right. I
So,
did what I could to fit in.
yeah, that's right. Hey, no one's casting aspersions. So before we get into sort of the importance of networking, which you just sort of illustrated a little bit, I want to talk about just the notion of writing a book about networking.
Yeah.
And the reason I want to preface this is just, I think it's a little, people might not understand. People may think like, oh, I know how to network. I don't, that to borrow the phrase from Frank Zappa, right? Like writing about networking seems to be like dancing about architecture, right? Like how does one, how can you really capture networking in a book,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
when you were sort of thinking it together, why should someone buy a book about networking when they're probably like, I just need to get out of the house more and meet more people or whatever?
Right. Well, I think the value of the book, there are a lot of kind of sidebars and breakouts with little exercises to do. But one of the things that I also tried to stress in the book is networking, which is not a word I'm super fond of, but it's the word we have other than connecting with
Yeah.
people. But let's say connecting with people. Is important not just when you're looking for a job. Of course, it is important for that time, and that's a specific use case that I think makes everybody hate networking. But in any case, we understand that one. But the need for making connections with new people, renewing connections with people you already know, can have long-lasting value that we just don't think of as networking throughout your life. So that when, for example, as has happened, I think, to all of us, we're facing caretaking for a parent,
Yeah.
or something like that. Sometimes, you want to talk to someone who's been there, and that's not necessarily your immediate circle, your friends and family, right? So to me, a network or a web of contacts is that group that's a bit larger and goes beyond the your kind of everyday people.
Yeah.
And that's where the value is for, I mean, it could be caretaking, it could be planning a vacation. It could be what book do I read next? But the idea is we're used to this notion of kind of reaching out for advice and tips and so on, but we don't think of it necessarily as an ongoing thing for advice. We think of networking as being more transactional in the moment, where in fact it's really a long game.
Yeah. I wonder if you could, like, let's take a sort of an existential question here, which is just sort of the idea that what do you think the combination of the pandemic and remote work has
Mm,
done to the need for networking and sort of people's so like when you talk to people now, I imagine everyone's come out of the pandemic a little battle scarred, right? And then
yeah,
like I work from home and have since 2017. And so it's just like, well, I'm either getting my kid ready for school, taking them to after school sports, and then I come home. I don't see anybody else throughout the day. I
right.
don't go into an office. I'm in a small little corner. I appreciate the flexibility of it, but I feel like it's also
Yeah.
decimated
Yes.
my willingness and my understanding of the need for networking.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, the pandemic changed a lot, but one of the kind of odd good things about that time was that because we were all at home, we were all somewhere, and we got used to video chat and video conferencing, so that yes, people in companies could have meetings and so on. That's fine. But I found myself at the time, a lot of people were asking, well, what if you are all remote and you've never met in person? And my advice at that time, still would be today actually, is, make a time to talk apart from the meeting, apart from the group, one to one with, your new colleagues or someone that you want to get to know who's on the team or whatever it is. One to one still counts, and one to one can still happen over video, ideally in person sometime. Ideally, a company has the foresight to have kind of offsites for everybody coming together once or twice a year or something like that, because a little bit of in-person time can really strengthen the bond that's virtual, right? That people have. But in any case, I think figuring out making time for those calls and during the pandemic, I mean, I was reaching out to people I hadn't been in touch with in 10 or 15 years, but it was an easy, conversation to have. Like, I've been thinking about you. How are you doing?
Yeah.
Where are you now? How's your family? Like, just that kind of thing was, uh, I think, a welcome aspect of the whole thing. And now, I mean, yes, you want to have one-to-one time with new colleagues or new acquaintances for sure, and in person when you can. But it did change the idea that, everything has to be in person. I mean, if you worked in a large company, and I did do this at Google because I had a lot of international colleagues, and same later when I worked at Twitter for a few years, you get used to the idea that you're going to have like a virtual coffee with someone. Like, let's
Yeah.
just catch up outside of the work agenda, outside of the tasks. So, in a way, we've gotten a new tool out of this that helps us. And by the way, just a plain phone call can also help. My friends who are like at full-time jobs, they will say to me, could we just talk on the phone? Like, I'm on Zoom all day.
Right.
So, and I'm like, okay, I like the face to face, but
Me too.
I understand for people who are just constantly on calls.
So I want to ask you because, and you start off the book this way, right? Which is a lot of the negative feelings towards networking or sort of the fear around it is that it is just entirely transactional,
Yeah,
which is I'm going to this event because I want to hand my business card out to X many people and I want to get X many in return. And then if I need something, I can, I'm
yeah.
better equipped to ask them for something. How do you think people should sort of reframe how they think about networking with the understanding that, as we alluded to earlier, there's no better word for it.
Right, right. Well, I think that the idea that it's a numbers game somehow, and that if you don't have kind of a clear plan, and the nature of the event that you're going to kind of make all the difference. So if you're going to, a networking event where it's like meet and greet other people who are also seeking jobs, I mean, that's going to be possibly a low return, right? In terms
Yeah.
of your ability to do anything. But if you're at a conference or a workshop or a panel or something like that, then maybe, but you have to go in the spirit of, I'd like to connect with 2, 3, 4 people where I can follow up, because the transaction itself is never going to happen in the course of your 5, 10, 20 minutes with a stranger at a group event.
Yeah.
It's all going to be about the follow-up, where they work at the company you're interested in, they have the kind of job you're interested in, they know someone that you know in common, they wrote an article, whatever it is, their company's been in the news. That's what you have a brief conversation that includes something about that. And then, is it okay if I follow up with you? Because I'd like to talk to you more. The
Right.
follow-up is really, if anything, the sort of transaction, but it can be very painless, and it doesn't obligate someone to, kind of stay too long at the group event. Because that's just the beginning. The whole thing is, when you're on that kind of job hunt, it's a scavenger hunt.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question that's going to sound simplistic and reductive, but it's not meant to be. So, isn't a lot of networking just being polite?
Uh, Polite, and I would say also maybe thoughtful. So you have
Okay.
to have a sense of the other person. Polite in that, yes, you thank someone after you've met them or corresponded with them or been introduced to them or whatever. You thank them for, passing on your resume if that's what they did, or something. Yes, always polite. But the thoughtful part is like having a feeling about that person and their interests. So as opposed to just, you're an object of my desire, right? That I'm gonna pursue now, to my end. Instead, to have a sort of openness and a thoughtfulness about, well, what are you interested in? What are you seeing out there? What drives you? What keeps you up at night? Whatever so that you're listening to this other person. They may tell you more, and if you find you have some connection, some chemistry with them, then that's going to help the further conversations that you may have, especially
Yeah.
when you find you have things in common.
Yeah. All right. So I would be remiss if I didn't say that we are hosting a special evening with you in San Francisco on July 11th as an open water event. And it is a taking the work out of networking event, right? So this is a networking event, but it's a networking event where you get to learn how to network in a more effective way. Now, I don't want to give away anything, but one, I would like, as we sort of wind down here, which is, what can people expect from this event, right? That they could put into practice. The idea is, hey,
Yeah,
we're in a setting,
yeah,
let's learn something, and then let's go put it into place without giving the tips away, just what people
yeah.
can expect. But two, following up with that is, what should people prepare in
Ah,
advance of it to make the most out of the event?
very good question. Um, so as to what to prepare, it shouldn't be elaborate and it shouldn't be a stressor. But if you have some idea of what you're working on, what your idea is, what you're interested in pursuing, I mean, open water folks tend to have lots of ideas and are already doing what they want to be doing. But if you're looking for contacts, guidance, other introductions and so on, be prepared to briefly describe your thing, your business, your consulting, your interest, and say a little bit about it and what you're looking for in relation to that. Are you looking for board members? Are you looking for investment advice? Are you looking for something else? And that should be like a short paragraph, if you can imagine that while you're talking. Um, I mean, really, the point is to have more conversation, but to include something that can give somebody else a hint about how they fit in with you or what they might be able to do for you, because that's the spirit in which we get together is, how can I help you?
Yeah.
And oh, that's interesting what you're looking for. Oh, I know somebody. I mean, that just happens in the course of the conversational exchange. And I think in terms of things we can do that. I mean, I hope there's Q&A so that we can talk about some real world questions and situations. But in general, it is to think about, who you'd like to follow up with. I think one of the stressors around networking is people think, I have to like connect with everybody I've ever met or ever worked with.
Yeah.
And no, absolutely not. It's the people that you kind of resonate with, you have a good sense of, you have, some spark with. It's people you like that you want to pay attention to. So, you might have, even with a nice, well-intentioned person, you might have a dud conversation. Okay, that happens. But then, someone else you might discover, oh, we actually have a lot in common, or we're interested in the same thing. Those are the ones to really pursue and follow up, not everyone that you got their card. And by the way, I don't even know if we're all having cards anymore.
Yeah. I realized as soon as that came out of my
We're
mouth, I'm like, ooh, I am dating
we're
myself.
beaming to each other.
Yeah. My QR code. I'm going to
Yes,
get as many QR codes as I can.
exactly.
Uh, well, listen, Karen Wickre, I am so excited that you are a part of Open Order and also helping us with our networking event on July 11th in San Francisco. The name of your book is Taking the Work Out of Networking. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Chris. I really enjoyed it.